you can just see yourself in this book. You know, it's not a novel, it's prose poetry. Of 130 some odd chapters, only like 30 of them move the narrative forward. The vast majority of this book is reflections on like who and what the whale are, and who and what we are, and what the sea is for, and what the sky is for, and the nature of being. It's not a novel so much as it's this massive hall of mirrors where every chapter is a way for you to see parts of yourself and choose which one makes sense contextually or relationally. That's why I love this book so much.
Joe.
Trey.
Hey, what's up, buddy? Thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to jump into this with you. Moby Dick. Man, that's a big book. So let's start by kind of giving the backstory and laying the framework as to how this started, as in how you and I decided to kind of jump in and look at this whale of a book, quite literally. And
Nice.
what your mindset was, because I remember I presented this idea to you of like, hey, why don't we go through this together? Do you remember what you were thinking when I first introduced the idea of reading this book together?
Well, we'd already read Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, and that was really cool, maybe for different reasons. And similar to The Brothers Karamazov and anything by Dostoevsky, Melville's Moby Dick was always on my list, but I never got to it because I knew it was about a guy trying to kill a whale. And it was baffling to me that was an interesting narrative to people for the longest time. You know, I was like, okay, maybe one day. But then I think you got started, you were a few chapters in, you're like, this is awesome. And so similar to a lot of different things that I didn't really consider, you're like, this is awesome, do this with me. So I jumped in. It was kind of like a leap of faith, you know. But we had that context, we had that trust built up. So yeah, I didn't really have a lot going into it, but I remember reading the first chapter and smiling ear to ear just on how Ishmael introduced the whole concept of going a whaling, and it clicked on like why we were reading this. So we can get to that. That's one of the all-time greatest chapters of American literature ever.
Yeah.
But I remember smiling at when I was reading that and knowing that this was something I wanted to do with you.
Yeah. No, I think that's important to give that backstory, because again, I think the whole essence of what we're talking about today and what we're jumping into is looking at not just Moby Dick, because Moby Dick is, I think, such a critically acclaimed. I mean, it's such a, everybody knows about Moby Dick and it's a classic, but I think that the lens in which we look at it, the symbolic imaginal lens, and this framework in which we approach these books, it transcends. It's not just for Moby Dick. It goes into all of art. But I think this book, especially if you look at it, if we're looking at it through the symbolic and the imaginal lens, offers such practical reflections as to life itself. And I think you begin, as I began to read it, it began to make more sense, like why so many people that I looked up to, so many mystics, so many spiritual practitioners, so many like deep intellectual thinkers that were people that were just brilliant, that had put this book at the top of their list. It began to really become illuminated to me why. But what was interesting was when I would read through reviews or when I look at other videos online, or I would see people talking about Moby Dick, it seemed to have such a different flavor for so many different people. And I think that's what I want to jump in on this podcast, not just what these things specifically mean. And we'll try not to give any spoilers away.
Well, I'm planning on spoiling. Are you not spoiling?
I mean, I guess I don't know if there's a way to do this without spoilers. So
I think there's a rule that if a book has been around for 80 years at this point,
the spoilers,
that ship has sailed. If you're watching this, spoilers ahead. That was fun.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But again, I think that this is like a really interesting idea of thinking about works of art, thinking about books, thinking about the spiritual practice as a practice of reflection and psychological reflection. And I think this book is the epitome of what, of that mirror and what we can do and what we can look at it. So why don't we jump in and also give a little bit, I think this might help to just frame it. Give a little bit about your relationship to the symbolic and the imaginal world
Yeah, yeah.
before we go
So
into this?
I'm a lifetime literalist, right? So I've been reading fiction my whole life, but there was always this clear divide between, real life Joe and that mental space and fictional stories. So I read Lord of the Rings, I read The Wheel of Time, Dune, all these different stories, and I definitely saw that I liked them, but I never stopped to consider why I love fictional realities. But so when it comes to me actually engaging meaningfully and intentionally with the symbolic or the imaginal, I think the story honestly starts in 2020, middle of COVID, you know, peak of the pandemic. I'm watching that the Bo Burnham Inside Netflix special that you've seen. I think it was really, really popular. And I remember enjoying because you can really cut in half that special. The first half's really funny. The second half gets really philosophical and really deep. And there was a
Almost
song right in
almost
the
prophetic, in a sense.
yeah,
It's like a in a lot of
yes.
ways.
True. I mean, and I want you actually at some point to define like true art for the listeners, like from the Jungian perspective, or like what true art is. But this might be like rubbing up on that definition of true art because it revealed so much about me to me. But there's a song right in the middle. And I remember I was on my phone and he was on in the background. And one of the lines was, "Do I have your attention? Yes or no?" I bet I guess the answer, but I don't want to know. Am I on in the background or are you on your phone? Don't tell me because I don't want to know. And so he's understanding that he put all this effort and all this work in this cool comedy special. You should watch it if you haven't. But he's just resigned to the fact that people are bifurcated, that people can't even like distract themselves in a singular way, that we're split. We're shattered and we're fragmented. Like I can't even veg out with a comedy special on Netflix on the couch and not hold my attention. I have to also be doom scrolling on Instagram or something. And I remember just being like physically uncomfortable with the reality that was just revealed to me through art. And I think like weeks go by and I had a similarly tragic engagement with my son who like came into the room and said, Dad, watch, watch. And I said, I can't, buddy, I'm busy. And I wasn't busy. I was doom scrolling. And he just like shoulders slumped and like, I'm sorry, Dad. And it was just like tragic moment where he felt bad for invading my world. And what am I spending my time doing? I'm just doom scrolling. So I knew that I was looking for something, but after years and years of trying to find it on social media, on the internet, or whatever, I wasn't going to find it there. And that was kind of poison to relationships in myself, and with my family and with my friends. Right. So I said, this is the perfect environment for me to like remove my digital presence. Like, I don't need social media for my work. I don't need social media for my friend group. We had a pretty, stable environment of friendship where we were at. And so I remember deleting everything, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everything, right? And it was awesome. There was this euphoria for a few weeks, a few months. But then there was this massive, like, internet sized hole of this online persona that I had just lived with. And so I'm like, how do I fill this? What do I do? What activities can I start engaging with? And, like, I was discovering all these different ways of going in. You and I, we talked about breath work, we talked about, dream analysis. And one thing that also came up was reading classical literature, just for the purpose of reading classical literature, not to like get clout online or like look at this cool quote from this cool book. But I literally just I start reading for the sake of reading, and then it changed from reading for the sake of reading to grow. And you're right, like Moby Dick is a mirror. It's like it's a hall full of mirrors where every character and every part of the ship is a reflection back of a different part of yourself. And Ishmael's the window into that hall of mirrors. So this is probably the book among a bunch of different books, but this definitely stands at the top of a practice that I've been developing over the last 4 or 5 years, like, in the larger ecology of practice of breath work, of looking at my dreams, of sitting quietly with nothing in my hands and nothing in my mind, looking at a sunset, just really basic, easy stuff that is lotion for my soul. It's medicine, it's water. So yeah, that's the context of how I've started. I've been reading for forever, but really reading on purpose in the way probably you're supposed to have been reading this whole time, for the last few years or so. So that's a little bit of the context for how I
Yeah.
entered into reading this book.
Well, and when you first started, so I guess I'm curious, like, let's jump into it because I think we can continue to unpack some of that as we talk. But just for the listeners and everybody kind of interested in what are we talking about when we talk about the
Yeah,
symbolic reading of Moby Dick? What do we like? What does that actually mean, and how do we actually look at that? And so maybe let's paint. I don't know. Maybe you start by kind of talking about some of the themes that kind of like jumped out to you. I'm really wondering the first part where you were like, "This has hit me in a way that I'm not just intellectually, digesting, but I'm feeling it in my body, I'm
yeah.
feeling it in my soul."
And this is a testament to Melville, and I think this is why it's a classic, right? Because the first paragraph of this book is a call to adventure, a call from the land where things are measurable and understandable and scientific and geometric, and you can define and measure and experiment. It's the world of empiricism, right? The first paragraph is, hey, if anyone is looking for something more for their soul, the sea is always waiting. So, like, call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses, it goes on and he says, like, whenever I feel tempted to go on the street and knock people's hats off, I count it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. So it's for the seeker, it's for the restless wanderer. It's this, hey, do you have everything you need, technically speaking, from like a food and shelter and safety and maybe even vocational standpoint, but there's still this big hole
Yeah.
you're trying
Yeah.
to fill? The sea, go to sea. And throughout this book in Loomings, um,
Well, let's
there's
stop. Hold
another.
on. Let's
Go ahead.
clarify that real fast. So let's go back. So we look at this call, right? So you have the beginning, this call to what Jung would call individuation, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
he's calling like this is the hero's descent. This is what we see in Star Wars. This is where we go into the cantina, the Mosley cantina. You're feeling this longing that there's a restlessness, right? Like that stirring. And so the sea in this case would represent the unconscious, right? This voyage is our intuition. It's like that
yeah,
feeling of like I want to go into the depths of the sea, and Ishmael's curiosity signals that there's this stirring that is calling to, we'll call it the ego, right? Like so the ego would be our perception as to what our life is, the money we make, the food, like the family we have, the job title, the success, like all the things that we're defining ourselves with that maybe is satisfying, maybe it's not, maybe it's leaving us with this like curiosity as to what else is out there. And this is a great just start to just the whole process that I would say anybody that ever enters into a spiritual practice has to start through that entering of the threshold, the crossing of the threshold, the getting onto
yeah,
the boat.
yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to lay that out a little bit.
Yeah, for sure, and it's cool because there's a lot of characters in the story, and they're not overly deep. Like, you compare them to, like, Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, where you have Alosha and Ivan and Dmitri and the dad, Fyodor, like, those characters are so layered, they're so deep, and you can lose themselves in the characters. They're full people. What's beautiful about Moby Dick is that the Pequod is the person, and all the different members of that. The Pequod's the ship that they go sailing on. If you haven't read it, and all the different crew members are parts. They're different. They're different elements, right? And so they're not overly deep, but there's a lot of them. And what they lack in depth, they make up for in reflective properties. Where that's what I loved, is that you can just see yourself in this book. It's not a novel, it's prose poetry. Of 130 some odd chapters, only like 30 of them move the narrative forward. The vast majority of this book is reflections on like who and what the whale are, and who and what we are, and what the sea is for, and what the sky is for, and the nature of being. It's not a novel so much as it's this massive hall of mirrors where every chapter is a way for you to see parts of yourself and choose which one makes sense contextually, or which one makes sense, you know, relationally. That's why I love this book so much. But I mean, one thing I definitely wanted you to get a chance to do before we go too far is this book definitely represents like the exemplary epitome of true art. And I know Jung, you're a big Jung guy, like I know he had really, really clear feelings on what separates true art from, or maybe brings it above the masses, or maybe like the goal of a popular book or a commercially popular book would be to entertain and hold attention, and true art would be something that taps into something different or maybe deeper.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a few different things that I've really enjoyed. And it's Jungian based. I mean, that was his exploration into the unconscious. And a lot of the stuff that he talked about was the representations that we see. Aldous Huxley also talks about this in Doors of Perception. He has this insane psychedelic trip in which he starts to see the items around him begin to lose the form that they have so concretely held on to while he's under the influence of this mescaline, or I don't know what it was. But as he began to see, things began to become something different. It wasn't about the images that he was seeing. It was the depth and the complexity and just how these things are held together. But when he came out of that, what he noticed was, as he looked at works of art, as he looked at like these classics, he began to see that those images and those thoughts, those words, those ideas had a very similar resonance. Like he then understood where they got those from. So in a sense, artist, the artist is the psychonaut, is the person that dives into the unconscious and brings up something and presents it to the ego, to the world, for us to look at. And so I think that's why I love Picasso, right? He dives in and he's bringing these abstract forms, and what is he showing us? It's like these are representations of the unconscious emergence that we see into life. And so, and for Jung, art wasn't so much about the product. It wasn't necessarily so much about, here's my piece of art, here's what I have, here's my the thing that I own, and the texture of the quality that it's whether or not you consider it good art or bad art. He wasn't as much concerned about that. For him, art was the process of things coming into existence and the discovery. So a lot of the dream work that he did, where he would get uh, analysans to draw their dreams, it was more about, through the process of doing that, through the process of engaging that way, you are tapping into a function within yourself, and that is birthing something new. So I think art remembers, art reveals, art is an exploration. It's not owned by the ego. If that, I mean, I think that's the easiest way
Yeah.
to put it.
Well, that's something that really struck me because I wasn't really familiar with those definitions for art at all. I didn't go past, oh, this person's very creative when I was reading a book. But reading Moby Dick and then perceiving Moby Dick through a Jungian lens was a little bit eerie for me because it lines up so perfectly across like all the different archetypes: ego, shadow, self, the unconscious versus the conscious. It's almost too clean to the point where I'm like, this is crazy because I think Nietzsche was after Melville, Jung was after Melville. Melville was a school teacher in the 1830s, I'm pretty sure, went on one whaling voyage in the 1840s, was like a adventure novelist of very middling popularity. And then he drops this book in 1851, never wrote anything like it ever again. It was just his magnum opus. He was a clerk at a customs house. He died in not poverty, but I think it was like right on the poverty line. Like he just went from this to just obscurity, to the point where you're like, whoa, like you're right. It's not so much that he constructed this. I'm not denigrating his memory. It's a beautiful book, and I'm so impressed by it. But it's more like he unearthed a thing. He uncovered a thing that was self-revelatory, that you saw just through eons and eons of mythological cultures. The Norse, the Greeks. You can find so much in this, and I think that's what's really powerful about this book and books like it. That true art is a mirror for
Well,
individuation.
and not to sidebar it too much or get off on a tangent, but I think that is also the reason why things like Lord of the Rings, you look at some of these works that have this intense resonance in things in culture, but within our hearts. I think it's because what happens is when people go to that level of the self, into the unconscious, into the depths, and you unearth something that is quite, it challenges the idea of what we consider to be real. If we live in the literalism and we live at this world of like, well, I'm going to have a very narrow definition of what I consider to be real and not real, and we start to kind of loosen up our grip, and we start to realize that there are layers of realness in different ways and capacities, that
Yeah,
as you loosen that grip, now you start to see and you start to recognize within other works or within other creations what levels of journey has been taken into certain places. And so that's why, there's a lot of overlaps between Jung's Red Book and the Lord of the Rings, which is fascinating how many correlations there are. And so when you're saying, I was doing this work, I'm starting to unpack my own journey into the unconscious, my own journey into the shadow and the self and the ego, like looking at all these things and begin to unearth certain things. Now you're starting to see someone else who has done this and who is doing this, and it's starting to come alive in a really interesting way. It's the same way in like the alchemical traditions. Like a lot of people get hung up on the physicality of it, but what Jung said is like, no, if you look at what they're doing, they're projecting this interior transformation and this interior process that they're doing. And so those people that are also doing that as well, a lot of people thought it was like this hidden language and this code, but it's a way of writing so that way they could transfer this information and other people would latch onto it and say, "Oh, I know what they're talking. I've felt this.
yeah,
Like I've been
yeah,
there. I've done this." And it's just but what's sad about it, and maybe we can, I think we'll hit it, but like it's that letting go and the like dissolving that line that you talked about at the beginning of, I used to read stuff and it's like I compartmentalized, this was the fantasy, this is the real world. And it seems like with this book, and I don't think this was the first one, but it seems like this was probably a really impactful one, to say the least, where you didn't go into it with that, and so then you started to see like all
yeah.
sorts of new
Yeah, and
information.
it's cool to see that, like, Melville. So these whaling voyages, well, just to, like, frame it for those who aren't, like, initiated, right? Before light bulbs, kerosene kept the lights on. So kerosene's a byproduct of petroleum, right? But before kerosene, whale oil kept the lamps on, right? So whaling, just for the 19th century, was really, really important as a commercial enterprise. I mean, you got a lot out of it. You got ambergris out of it, which is a component of cologne and perfume. So there was a lot of importance for whaling. We're not hunting whales anymore in modernity, so that's another layer removed of like, okay, guy kills a whale for fun, I guess. Melville went on this trip, right? He went on one of these voyages that I think lasts somewhere around 3 years, and you find in the book, because I'm pretty sure Ishmael is just Melville, like Ishmael is just him, how he was on his voyage. But you go through these vast periods of boredom where you're hitting large periods of reflective meditation, where you're
Yeah.
finding you're rolling with the whale. You're in the crow's nest and you're looking out for whale sightings, and you just get lost in this meditative world where you're just going further inward, further inward, further inward, and you're embodying all the nature around you, doing what the transcendentalists also in the 19th century, like Ralph Waldo Emerson and his lot, they're seeing God, they're seeing the divine, seeing this mystical world come alive around them in nature. So that's maybe another feather in Melville's cap, that he didn't artificially or synthetically just create the story, but he unearthed this journey into the unconscious, which is the sea, and this journey to find Moby Dick, which is what's Moby Dick? You know, like God or the capital S self for Jung.
Which is
And
interesting. That's interesting too. Just to add that, highlighting the meditation part, the meditative part, the turning off the
yes,
noise, the getting off the cell
yes.
phone, the stopping the doom scrolling, the time, like carving out. It's like many people are like, "Well, this isn't a reality." Well, how much time have we carved out to provide this type of space?
And I fully believe that if I hadn't have had those years of feeling a really, doom scrolling is a version of seeking. Doom scrolling is just this, it's this manifestation, especially in the Western world, but probably all over the place. Of I am looking for something, and you do your stories, and you go right, and you end the stories. You're like, well, it wasn't there. Let me go vertical now, and you scroll, 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 and it's not there. You can't even name what you're looking for, and you can't even establish success criteria for when you find it. But that's definitely a version of seeking. So we're all seekers. I mean, even in the first chapter of Looming, every robust, healthy boy with a robust, healthy soul in him at some time or another is crazy to go to sea. It's ubiquitous. So, like Melville sets forward this idea that seekers and non-seekers is kind of a misnomer. Everybody wants to go to sea because the earth is land and sea. It's the material and it's the mystical. It's the conscious and it's the unconscious. So I just think doom scrolling is just maybe the worst way to go about seeking. But even deleting doom scrolling, you still have this muscle memory, and you have to replace that muscle memory with, for me, maybe other people can speed run this, but for me, it took years of on purpose creating physical distance with my phone. Because even being off social, I would scroll LinkedIn in the same way. I would like it's these muscle. I would scroll my email inbox the same way. You know, so you create all these rituals around it. So you have to create physical distance, and you have to simulate what Melville was probably experiencing and what he wrote Ishmael was experiencing when he was entering this
Yeah.
meditative state on the Pequot, where everything was quiet. You have to get there. And I know I had to get there before this book meant anything to me, because without that, this is just about a crazy guy trying to kill a white whale. 90 chapters surrounding it on just this like pontification about the nature of things. It doesn't hit at all unless you speak that same language of diving into these inner places for the goal of growing yourself and also to find God, you know?
Yeah, it's like you need the practice, you need the frame, you need at least enough of the framework to kind of have, like you said, an initiation almost. Like it has to
Yeah.
be some type of initiatory practice in which you have, which is a lot of like why this podcast exists, because I think that the language of the imaginal is something that has been so stripped from society. It's like I think of two things. One, you talk about doom scrolling. It's like, yeah, you're seeking, but you're also it's a disembodied way of seeking too, because you don't need any faculty. You don't need anything but your finger and just you stare. And so like you can literally detach, whereas like other forms of seeking, it's like when you're actually seeking in the woods, like you're walking, you're moving, you're doing, you're in motion, you're like looking through things. And so I think that is one thing. But then also this idea of when we're trained, the same way doom scrolling trains us, like you're talking about, and conditions us and conditions the mind towards a certain horizontal way of seeing. I think that that materialistic Cartesian framework that we have, which is just kind of splitting us from what we consider to be real and what we consider to have value in certain ways. So it's like the way that we're able to look at something and the way that we're able to hold it with multiplicity, as opposed to just being like seeing things for functionality. Like, okay, well, this is what this does. There's an
Yeah. Well,
essence.
so you create this habit of kind of subcontracting the mechanism of going and finding God or the divine or whatever you want to call it, the self, right? And that's actually another concept that I love in this book. Do you remember the chapter where he's like making fun of all the guys who make paintings of whales? Where
But
like
yeah, that was
Melville's
like,
like poking
yeah,
fun at everybody's,
the
yeah, everybody
statues,
has an
the
idea of what the
images.
whale looks like, right? And I really love this. He's like, that chapter was so tedious to me because I had forgotten to like switch it to the mythological prose poetry reading. And I'm like, this guy is just going on this revenge tour. So to frame it for the listeners, right? There's this chapter kind of in the middle of the story where he just goes like off the deep end and criticizes everybody who lives on the land, so all these non-whaler types, all these non-sailors, these non-adventurers, everybody has an idea of what the whale looks like. The chapter's called "Of the Monstrous Pictures of Whales," and he makes fun of them and is like, "You don't know what a whale is. You don't know what a whale is. You don't know what a whale is." And at the end of this chapter, he says this: "For all these reasons, then, any way you may look at it, you must needs conclude that the great Leviathan, which is what he calls the whale, which is very, mythical, that the great Leviathan is that one creature in the world which must remain unpainted to the last. True, one portrait may hit the mark much nearer than another, but none can hit it with any very considerable degree of exactness. So there's no earthly way of finding out precisely what the whale really looks like. And the only mode which you can get kind of close is to go a whaling, right?" And that I immediately thought of, in the Old Testament where God's giving the Ten Commandments, and one of the major laws is no graven images, and that goes part and parcel with don't worship any other gods but me. This is Yahweh's message to the Jews, and I never understood that as a commandment. I get the like, don't worship other gods, don't sleep with other people's wives, don't murder. Everything made sense, but this like prohibition against graven images was the strangest rule to me, because wouldn't that, like, you have all these idols of all these gods, right? And when you see an idol of a god, you worship it. And if there's an idol to Yahweh, that's going to trigger right and true and good worship. Um, so wouldn't you want like pictures and idols and these things to trigger and to cue worship? And I'm not reading any sort of meaning, Melvillian, Jungian meaning into the Ten Commandments, but what I thought of was, for me, Moby Dick, the whale, that's God, right? And you go into the unconscious and you find God, and you know, he can present himself to you, but you're only going to get a part of him. And the big reason that they don't make graven images was a rule was, if you have a picture of God, if you have a picture of the whale, you can be tricked into thinking you know what the whale is on land, and you never have to go whaling. It's not required. So people can have meditative practices and these inward reflective journeys where they're going into the imaginal, they're going into these places. I don't have to. They've done it. I can just project onto them, and I can learn whatever I need to know. Just tell me who to vote for. Tell me what to believe,
Yeah.
right? I can subcontract that out. And I love Melville's message that no image of the whale is actually even close to satisfactory. And even when you see it, you're seeing it through this mist and the wind and the clouds, and it's only going to show part of itself. It's this very large, beautiful, violent, mystical thing that you're going to try to encounter, but you can't even get close to encountering unless you go whaling.
Yeah.
And it's almost
Yeah.
like there's one picture in all the universe that's actually okay. And it's the picture that hangs above the fireplace in the Spouter Inn. If you remember, like the first part of the Spouter Inn, Ishmael walks in and he can't even make out what the painting is. He said, like above the fireplace, there was this picture covered in soot, decades and decades of soot, and you had to open windows to kind of get an idea of what it was. And is it this? Is it this? You have no idea what it is. There's all these mystical things it could be. And then after a lot of thinking and consulting with generations, you come to this conclusion that it's a whale being encountered by a whaling ship. But what does that picture in that place encourage? That picture in the Spouter Inn, where's the Spouter Inn? That's where all the whalemen gather right before they're about to go off to sea. So, like, yeah, you can have your picture of the whale as long as it pushes you into that imaginal seeking, searching in the unconscious.
And that's yeah, and I think, just to hit on that, like, I think that's the difference between, iconography and a graven image, right? The iconography, like, the image of,
That's an icon. Spouter Inn is an icon.
like, allowing the image to see through into the reality. And I look at that and, like, and you can tie in propositional tyranny, which means, like, this idea that the most important things we can do is have our belief systems, right? The most important thing we can do is have a belief about the whale. And I think a lot of people live in that space because it's so much safer to adopt a belief about a whale that you're seeing in an image, a story about a whale that you're hearing. That's great. I'll take that. That's fine. I can have that right now. There's really no risk to that, and if there is risk, it's like there's a tribe. It's a lot easier than going in and facing, with the Spouter Inn. It's just the shadow and the other, right? You see the confrontation with the unfamiliar. with these instinctual parts of yourselves that must be encountered as we go into those spaces. And I think the hardest part about, I mean, let's talk about in today's culture, I think that there is a lot of fear based around what's in the ocean, what it's like to go whaling, because like the reality of it is it wasn't a safe activity. That is correct. Like, and we see all through the book, like there's things that can and will happen. And we'll talk about it. But I think this idea of looking at the process as too risky or it's inherently bad or we can protect ourselves by not participating or not doing it and having these images of these whales, and that's going to suffice. But I think in the long run you see it's like those things are actually just keeping us from participating. It's keeping us from the actual understanding of the whale, the actual
Yeah.
relationship with the whale,
Well,
of
that's the reason,
jumping
right?
in.
If I have a graven image, if I have the picture of the whale that gives me all of the, how what's the circumference, what's the diameter, what's the measurements, right? What's the makeup of the blubber? Where's the ambergris? Where's the like? If I have the whole picture of the whale, which I don't, but I think I do, then that, like you said, that's the substitute to go whaling. And then what can I do, right? What can I do with that? I have this picture of a whale that hangs in my house, right? And then that, well, okay, that's God over there. Okay, I got that. And then I can just obsessively worry about finances or paychecks or relationships. And I can let that just be a picture instead of what it should actually be, which is a call to the unconscious, a call. I mean, to take up your cross and follow me, to reject the things of the world and go all the way in. A lot of what Christ is saying of like, unless you hate your family, your father and your mother, and follow me, you have no part in the kingdom. There's no way for a rich man. It's easier for a camel to enter the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Not because there's something so wrong with a rich man, but because there's too much of the camel and the rich man are the same. So the camel's too big, right? It's so full of self, so full of ego, so inflated, so about this here and now, that how can you enter into this mystical, wonderful, imaginal, mysterious world of the nether regions, the watery unconscious? Because there's so much of you, you'll sink the boat. You need to lessen. You need to deflate, and you being the ego, right? But if I have the picture of the whale, I'm tricking myself into this propositional tyranny, and I'm leaving the phenomenological behind, this requirement to go a whaling. It's incumbent upon everybody because everybody feels that call at some point or another to go to sea. And what's at sea? This thing that might kill you, right? Spoiler alert. But in that flirting with the void and the veil and the edge of oblivion, that's where true life is found. That's where you actually come alive to the fullest, is in that search into the unconscious for the whale who is God. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it looks different. It's in what going back to what you say, there's a bunch of mirrors, and you look at Melville. I mean, there's so many different characters, and I think they
Yeah.
represent so many different ways of journeying. You
Yeah.
see Ahab, you see Ishmael, you see Queequeg, you see Pip. Like you see these people that are representing all sorts of different ways of approaching that. And I think that's another kind of aspect where it's very easy in the West to go into a right or wrong. Like, oh, this is the right way to do it. This is the wrong way to do it. This is the best way to believe this and the best way to do that. And I think that what I really enjoyed about this book is that you kind of see this spectrum of things that happen and ways that people adapt and approach life, like with the blacksmith, right? Like you see his life, you see what he did. You see a redemption, maybe, or maybe a half redemption, or you see this idea of different ways that they engage with this process of journeying into the unconscious. And that's what I really like about being able to see those clearly reflected. And there's certain characters that kind of stand out for that. And, I don't know if we want to go into Ahab yet.
Yeah, well, I'll let you. Ahab can be the climax because he's definitely the character. But I mean, you're talking about different characters on the Pequod. I love how they're paired. There's all these ego shadow combinations throughout. I mean, so on a whaling ship like the Pequod, that's the vessel that contains the enterprise of trying to engage with the whale. But in the ship itself, it's split up into these three parts. You have the different mates, right? So the third mate is Flask. He's a hyper materialist. He only thinks about, the whales in the sense of dollars and cents. How much money, how much oil can he get out of it? What stuff can he buy when he gets back to land? So by the way, that's like cautionary tale number one. There can be a moment where you decide to enter into the unconsciousness to find the whale. But even then, that it's still incumbent upon you to let yourself be grown, let yourself into those meditative practices. Flask didn't do that. So Flask is this hyper materialist, everything's dollars and cents. He's very practical, very small minded. He is the mate, right? So when the ship sights the whale, the three boats will drop. The mate's the only one with eyes on the whale. So it's kind of giving some credit to the fact that the ego still exists. Even in the unconscious, the ego, you can see a thing and you can orient yourself to it when you have some kind of phenomenological experience in like a meditation or breathwork session or in a dream, right? Like the eyes do matter, the ego does matter. So I like how these people, they still retain their identity. So I'm losing track though, my bad. The boats hit the water, they're going after the whale. The mate has eyes on the whale. Every other member of the boat has their back to the whale and rowing. So with every mate, there's a harpooner. And all three of the harpooneers are these like indigenous, they represent this indigenous, earth, fire, primordial force. They're not as rational. They're more, irrational. They're
Instinctual.
just by feeling. So I love all the combination. Flask is his harpooner is Dagu, this massive African. I don't know if he was a slave or not, but he was definitely like a victim of some prejudice and racism on the boat, on the ship rather. And so it's cool how Melville pairs those two up. Flask is all about commodities, and Dagu is like a commodity, and he's obsessed with justice and the force of good, and he's physically imposing. And Flask is very very short, and so there's this imagery in the combo between that ego shadow. Stub, who I think you liked, he was one of your favorite mates. Stub is he's mate number two, and he's constantly joking about everything. He's irreverent, he's flippant, except for when like there's moments in the story where there's a lot of tension or mortal danger. Then he becomes very like superstitious. So he's the foxhole prayer guy, and he's paired up with Tashtego, this American Indian who's reverent, somber, sober. But then my favorite combo, like in the book, is Starbuck, the first mate, who is this moral evangelical Christian who is fear motivated. He's all about believing the right thing. When he encounters Ahab's like divine revenge quest against Moby Dick, and he's ascribing deity to Moby Dick, Starbuck's really uncomfortable about that. He's like, that's blasphemous, that's heretical, that's not right. But he doesn't have the moral courage that you would expect by someone having such right beliefs, right? And his harpooner is, Queequeg, who's one of the most compelling characters in the book, because you even think for the time that Melville wrote this, here's a guy who he's a Pacific Islander, he's a cannibal, he literally eats his enemy after he's defeated his enemy, but he is that constant in the book. If ever there's a need, if anyone's fallen overboard, who's in the water immediately? Queequeg. If there's
Yeah.
a dangerous job that needs to be done, there's a scene where they're chopping up one of the whales after they captured it, and there's just this like cacophony of sharks that are just trying to get after Queequeg. It's the most dangerous job. He's doing it. Like the hardest job on the ship when they're trying to find the leak in
Yeah.
in one of the barrels. He's doing the hard thing. So the balance between Starbuck, who has all the right beliefs, propositionally speaking, but has no moral courage, can't act. He's stuck. He can't do the right thing. Queequeg eats people, doesn't have the right beliefs, but he's the one always doing the right thing. And
Right.
as a
Well, he's
Christian,
he's
go ahead.
also paired up with, I mean, I think you could make the union of opposites with Ishmael and Queequeg as well, because
Yeah,
they
for
were, I
sure.
mean, they were partners, or they were bunkmates, right? And
Yeah.
and I love the beginning where he jumps in and Ishmael is just so offended by like almost everything he does, right? Like, and I think Ishmael is probably not as evangelical as Starbuck, right? I mean, he's like he's I think he's just your ordinary egoic, like, I'm a
Yeah,
rational person, I'm a normal
yeah,
person.
he's the
Uh
everyman.
He's the everyman. He's like, I do things the right way. I have the right, like, rational, measured views. I have the appropriate amount of this. And I think we all kind of view ourselves as like, I'm in the middle, right? No one views himself as like any of these like exaggerated stereotypes. So I think it's interesting to see his position of and from a Jungian lens, I think this is really interesting because I think what that opens up is that instinctual drive within us. It's that primordial force that moves through us, that moves into our daily lives, that we are constantly suppressing. That the ego is always cleaning up and defining and making sure we present ourselves to others in an appropriate, rational manner. While the reality of it is the thing that drives forth a lot of what we need to get done and a lot of the urges and a lot of the I don't know, the progression of humanity has been that unconscious force within,
Yes,
that thing
yes,
that
and so
that just moves.
the fact that, like, Melville knew that, it just lends more credence to this idea that he didn't create this and synthesize it from all these different experiences he had, but he unearthed it. But Queequeg is like the ultimate Good Samaritan. I mean, you go back to like the time where like Jesus was asked, "What's the most important law from all of the law?" And he tells the Pharisee, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength." And he says, "The second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself." And the Pharisee says, "Who is my neighbor?" And then Jesus goes into, so there was a man who was walking from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he tells the story about the guy who got mugged. He has nothing. He's close to death. And all of the people, all the Starbucks who had the right beliefs, they had the right propositional theological framework of who God is, who we are, sin, death, redemption, all whatever, right? They all went by. They were busy, probably with ministry, probably with what God had called them to do. You can read a lot into that, but there was a reason, and these weren't horrible men in their own world. And oh, that's sorry, that's sad that that guy's hurting. I must move on. And then the Good Samaritan. And if you know anything about what the Samaritans were to the Jews, they had all the wrong beliefs. They had a different Bible. They worshipped in the wrong place. Instead of in Jerusalem, they worshipped in the mountain. Everything was wrong with how the Samaritans did it. But the Samaritan instinctually, you know, primally, this primordial, this force, this energy, he probably was like, oh man, this guy's going to die unless I do something. He wasn't thinking about anything else except for the immediate need, which was this like deep thing in his stomach. Maybe it didn't come from his head. And so he gave all the clothes off his back, all the money in his pockets. He wasn't a rich man either. It took all the money in his pockets to keep this guy alive. And you see that in Queequeg all over the place, always saying, I'll do that. I'll take care of that. I'll do this. And meanwhile, he comes from this place where he ate people. But Queequeg even said, like, that was the reason he became a whaler in the first place, because he wanted to get to America and discover the Christian God, because he thought that might be the true God. Queequeg was even seeking something in addition to his spiritual tradition. But
Yeah.
like, he was telling Ishmael about it, and he said, their God looks all like my God. So I'll keep looking.
Well,
Which is just like,
yeah.
whoa, like that's
Well, it makes me think a lot about this idea of the when we get out of our own way, we know what to do.
yeah,
We know how to treat people. We know what kindness is. We know what like there is wisdom. There's just wisdom within us that's instinctual. It's there, and I think sometimes it becomes really hard because we're disconnected from that, and we're taught to look at all the icon or all the graven images, all the pictures of the whale. We're looking for all of the things and all the propositions of like,
yeah,
well, and think about all that's happening in the world. It's like I think at the end of the day, when we look at our neighbor and when we feel these things rising up, I think that not having that connection and not being able to tune into that is causing a world of pain from projection of the stuff that we're limiting ourselves. And so I think, and the thing that's just it stands out to me so much is the offensiveness of Queequeg to
yeah,
Ishmael. And I
yeah,
think that's something to keep in mind because when I think about the work of shadow work, when I think about depth psychology, doing this type of work, it's not just about meditating, it's not just about breath work, it's not just about dreams. It's about noticing the offense when you see it in others and yourself, when a thought, like you feel the feeling come, you feel that thing that makes you just kind of say, like, I'm offended by that. And it's quite literally sitting with it, laying with it, like living in that space of like,
Yeah, sleeping with it, waking up with its arm up over you, like Queequeg and Ishmael were spooning in one of the
yeah,
chapters.
yeah, yeah.
But it's beautiful because it's Ishmael. Ishmael was so offended and afraid because offense and fear live in the same spot. It's, oh, that I don't like that because maybe that's wrong or maybe that'll hurt me. If it's the same place, offense
Or
and
I
fear.
don't like them because they're wrong. I don't like the things they're
And if they
saying.
and if they were and if they might be right, that's going to look like a lot of work on the back end for me because if they're right, I must be right. It's all these things happening in less than a second. So offense and fear and judgment, they come from the same place. But Ishmael is immediately offended by Queequeg. Queequeg has his little idol, like Jojo or whatever it's called. I forget, Yojo. And he's performing, demonic practice right in front of him. He's doing he's worshiping in a way that you never worship in a church, that you never see. So Melville's just throwing this character of Queequeg in your face, putting up the reader that's like, this is a bad guy, right? But then from that point on, Queequeg is the force of good. He is the best character on the Pequod. He is the closest to God. And and there is this merging. I think of the reason I say Queequeg is more Starbucks shadow is because after that first encounter Ishmael had with Queequeg and they woke up together, like cuddled, and
Yeah.
then Ishmael knew what Queequeg was, they had already merged. And then on the Pequod, you see what Ishmael maybe came into the story
Yeah. Well,
being
that's a good
in
point, and I think
Starbucks.
that's
Starbucks.
you can highlight that. I wanna highlight this because for people that are into Jung and that are into shadow work or that are into different parts work, I think this is important to remember that sometimes I see this happen a lot where we start to get this terminology, a Jungian terminology of like the anima, the animus, the shadow, the things that we start to define. But the reality of it is all there is no singularity. It's like you don't have one shadow, you don't have one animate, you don't have one part of yourself. You have a lot of different patterns that have been conditioned by a lot of different things. So when you think about this, even within yourself, you are Ishmael, you are Starbuck, you are a like you have the
Yes.
potentials of all
Yes.
of these. And the shadow, Queequeg, will move like each part will have a relationship to the opposite of that feeling. So, going from Ishmael, that's a great example because again, like that's the point. When you and confront like when Ishmael like sees the shadow for what it is, it becomes conscious. He embraces it. He individuates it. It becomes whole. He doesn't push away. He doesn't conquer sin by pushing it away, by defeating it. He understands it. He alchemizes it. He sees it and he realizes it's different than what he thinks it is. And so then it
Yeah.
moves
And
continually
then
through us.
and then from that point on, like half the times you hear about Ishmael, because he does fade as a character throughout the book, right? And that's probably an easy segue to Ahab down the road, but because Ahab takes over everything, his ego is just incredibly powerful and the force as well. But from that point on, when they wake up together in the chapter, I think it's the counterpane where they wake up and they see the checkered blanket. From that point on, Ishmael's always with Queequeg. But that's why this book is really cool because you're right. Like I can see I'm probably most naturally a Starbuck because I have there's this propositional tyranny that exists growing up Southern Baptist and evangelical that like so I watched in your episode. I'm the friend that got into breathwork and Googled is breathwork demonic. That's me. So like deep cuts reference, right? That was my mindset. So that's very much Starbuck of like I'm out here trying to be in the unconscious to find God, but like maybe Moby Dick isn't God, maybe it's just a whale. I'm out here doing these practices of meditation and this inward seeking and this process of individuation. It's definitely a goal of mine, but I'm definitely very much landed in my mind. I'm very much thinking about the shore all the time. Literally, that's like my profession is an analyst. I am thinking about things that are measurable and detectable, and you can prove it, right? Like, and so I resonate with Starbucks so clearly. That's why I love that Starbucks shadow for all the book. And it's tragic because Starbuck and Queequeg, Stubb and Tashtego, Flask and Dagu, there's never that alchemical union, right? Like the shadow, they're never brought in like Ishmael and Queequeg are. But I think that's fine because this is a work of art, and art is for performing that function as a mirror to the soul. So if I'm feeling particularly Starbuck one day, then I can look at Queequeg and just do it, whatever it is, instinctually, not be addicted to this rational propositional tyranny, but phenomenologically engage with whether it's another person or it's another part of myself. Let that instinctual harpooner attach to the whale, throw the harpoon, get stuck in, get engaged, get pulled into the process. All of these characters are readily available for me to embody. I can reach out, and it's a type that I can tether to depending on the circumstance and depending on what's contextually needed.
Yeah, and I think that's a good, I mean, the the position of what the ego is take like how we're approaching this journey, and I think that is a good, so let's jump into Ahab a bit, and then we
Yeah.
can kind of jump back in and out of it if that's because I do think that Ahab to me is one of the most interesting. I mean, I think he's the he is the him he's the main character in a lot of ways, right? Like I think that's the point of this. And what's interesting about it is that something that you were saying, and this idea that we're hitting on of shifting, and this process of unfolding, right? Where there's not really static. It's kind of flux, and you see this process unfolding where the introduction of Ahab is a bit mysterious, right? When they first get on the boat, there's people that are talking about Ahab. Ishmael is kind of like, what's the big deal? Is he coming? Is he not? Like, are we
He
supposed to?
doesn't show up until like what, chapter 20 some odd? I can't remember, but
And it's
yeah,
and
he's very much an idea for they're well outside of sight of land before Ahab comes out, which I think is very telling, like in his character.
and there were signs, right? There were signs and indications of something was off, something's not quite right. You get this feeling that there's something that is awry within this character, but you don't have a clear idea, and they don't. Melville does a really good job of really containing that throughout the entire book, where you start to see the spillage, right? And I think what's interesting about that is when we're talking about the unfolding of these characters throughout this novel and the individuation, the growth of these characters. And if you think about the ship, you think about the entirety of like this unit of the ship as parts of the of yourself, like of parts of oneself. It's interesting to think about in the sense of what happens when one part goes unchecked, or when it is allowed to continue in a certain way. And what you really run into is, and I think Ahab, to summarize Ahab, would be a cautionary tale of ego inflation, right? It's what happens when there's this possession. Jung would call this the possession by the archetype. So it was like for him, he had seen the whale, he had seen a glimpse of this numinous image, this bigness of what this was, had this encounter with it, and it slowly began to just build and build and build and build, and there was never any integration
Mm.
of of who he was with the rest of the ships. It was like when he was present, that was driving the show. That was driving the ship. And I think that in real life, that's something that is so easy to see in other people sometimes when you see like someone that has that type of an ego inflation. Or, and when I say ego inflation, I don't mean like they're just prideful. It's not just like their ego is just like big and they think they're better than everybody else. Ego inflation in this sense is when one particular lens of how we see the world becomes so domineering over all of our life that we literally become obsessed with that mission or that cause, and we lose balance with the rest of the system. We lose the ability to hear other information, and you see that throughout the whole book. What do we see? There's constant warning signs and signals to Ahab as to different ways of viewing the whale, different ways of approaching this, different ways of positioning himself. But yet the entire time we see this rejection of any of that integration, any of that ability to listen to the whole, to kind
Yeah.
of be incorporated. And you just watch this grow. And I think one of the scenes that I think is just the most, I mean, powerful scenes in the whole book, and it really I think summarizes it, was when Ahab, during Ahab's monologue, where the ego
Yeah.
basically
Ordered
declares
it.
war on the divine. So he says, "Talk not to me about blasphemy, man. I would strike the sun if it insulted me. For if the sun could do that, then could I do the other. Since there is ever a short of fair play herein, jealousy presiding over all creation, but not my master, man, is even that fair play. Who is over me?" And so you really see this total defiance. I mean, this is the ego. This is rebellion. This is pure rebellion against the cosmic order. This is, the rejection of the limits, the nature of fate itself. This is
Yeah.
He fully embodies that archetypal, possession, or that inflation.
Well, I just think I find Ahab to be one of the most terrifying concepts in literature because you see Ahab and he is, for all purposes, probably the most capable whaleman, not even on the Pequod, but probably, on the whole enterprise. He's been doing it for, I think it's like 40 some odd years. He understands all the signs, all the currents, all the longitudinal, latitudinal, like all the rules of engagement. And again, put it in its mythological, imaginal framework. What is whaling? It's encountering God. It's encountering the divine. And where is the sea? It's the unconscious. So you got someone who for 40 years is engaging in these, non-egoic, unconscious places. And he should be the one initiating the process of individuation from the mates and the harpooneers, the one who is causing Perf, the blacksmith, to heal from all the trauma of his backstory. But he's not, because he encountered the one true whale, the great white whale, Moby Dick, and Moby Dick wounded him. You encounter the divine. What did he say at the end of the chapter about the pictures? If you encounter it, you run no small risk of being eternally stove and sunk by him. And what's terrifying is I see what I could become, if I continue being a ministering Christian, someone who has mastered the craft of encountering these hard to explain, mystical, subconscious, spiritual, forms and functions. He's the pastor that says we're going to do this, and people are like, why? And he says, God told me so. But the voice in his head, is that God, or is that his ego? It's his power that terrifies me. It's the fact that he should have known better. And there was everything in his life to ensure that he's living at sea. He's living in this place where he should have, like Ishmael, had these meditative experiences, and the water should have dictated the pace, the time and tempo of his meditation. But what dictated the time and tempo of his meditation? His stomping from deck to deck on his stub. It was his rhythm. It was his time, my tempo. So he's a terrifying character to me because should have known better. Very, very capable, very competent, but just got trapped in the thing that I think a lot of us get trapped in, especially in to use the really common idiom, right? In the West, in the technologically literate and the scientifically literate, in the empiricist, the Cartesian Lutheran West, where we are very smart collectively in the body of knowledge we understand about, aeronautics and chemistry and biology and botany and all of it, right? You're very smart, but like the ego is just, it's domineering. It's so powerful. And even someone who lives in the unconscious, you know, like Ahab, he's not above it. He's not above an inflated ego. So
Yeah.
it just highlights the importance of an intentional ecology of practice
Yeah.
to
I
soften
mean,
that.
100%. And that is the doing, right? Because I think that there's two things that were, I think, interesting to me when I was reading this. One character also that really, I was struck by was Pip. right? Pip
Yeah,
was this, kind of a
antagonist.
nobody character, right? Like,
Yeah,
he was just a he wasn't even a it wasn't really he's not really talked about at all up until, like, the very end, and the only time he's talked about is when he falls in the water accidentally, twice, they fall in, and the first time they get him out, and they're like, "Hey, don't do that again. Like, what are you doing? Like, this is dangerous, and that's not smart." And then he does it again, and the second time they leave him for, like, I don't know how long, I can't even remember.
it's like days or something.
Yeah, like, I was like, "Oh, he's gone," and then they found him again, and it's like they pull
Well,
him
they didn't
back.
find him, did they? They didn't find Pip. They found something
No, they
else.
didn't find Pip. When they recovered him, they didn't know like, he had been so impacted by this submergence into this, we'll call it the unconscious. He had seen the numinous, he had seen the divine, and I think that's what's really, to me, is very, very powerful, because I think that people don't recognize, like, when we talk about God, I think we're very fast and loose with the word. I think we're very, like, there is a loving nature that I think that is the essence. The essence of God is love, and I think that that is fundamentally there. But I also think that that journey into the vastness and the ineffable and just the sheer power of what that means in relationship to the ego, in relationship to our propositions, our belief systems, the way we've constructed our lives, the orientation that we have, can be very, very disrupting, because it doesn't care about the plans that you have made for your individual, like, lives, about I want this and this and this. And if it's not connected to the deeper part, then it's not connected. And so I think his that character, to me, represents what happens when we get pushed into these experiences, and when we see these things that shock us to the point where you start seeing these symbolic eruptions. You see these ego that has not been developed and not been loved and nurtured and protected, and been able to been within that context of community and ecology and of practice with people to help walk through what it means. And so, to make this full circle, I think that that's why when we talk about this stuff, you don't go sailing alone, right?
Yeah,
You don't when you're going into this unconscious, like, only you can tap into what that unique experiences is going to look like. But I think that there is this idea that I think there's this false idea that that belongs only to me.
that's actually beautiful. I really love that. You look at the Pequod, and you could probably say 3 people encountered the divine in that numinous experience. 2 of them were destroyed by it. The third, Queequeg, was healed and made like Queequeg, especially in the chapter where Queequeg is close to death, and it's talking about how you saw on Queequeg's face the divine mysteries of the universe. Like, where it's talking about how his body was failing, but his eyes were expanding, like a splash in the sea might expand after you drop a pebble in it, and he was gazing into eternity. But then
Mm,
he rallies from that because of the love of the ship coming around him, and then the coffin that he was supposed to be buried in, he starts transcribing the tattoos that he was tattooed with. By the way, his tattoos are the mysteries of the universe that his priest on his island tattooed, but nobody can read, not even him. And Ahab says about Queequeg, because he sees that Queequeg knows he's the one that has encountered that numinous experience where he's met God, and like Ahab has this comment like, "Oh, the tantalization of the gods," because here it is. Here's the message. Here's the divine. All the rules, all the answer. The answer to everything is in this archaic language, in this language nobody speaks, not even Queequeg. So Queequeg encounters it and comes through, and he goes through the ketosis where he goes in. He goes almost to death. I think Jung has that concept, right? Like, you go into the underground, the underworld, and you come out new and whole because you pull in the suffering, you let it grow you. But Pip didn't have time and space to do that. He's literally in survival mode for hours and hours and hours, and the experience with the numinous breaks him. And then Ahab encounters Moby Dick, gets his leg eaten off. So he touches God. And I'm just using the word God because I don't really have another word for it. But maybe in another video you can pull more about like what Moby Dick even is. But
yeah.
Ahab meets Moby Dick, and instead of going through that process of letting that pain grow him, uh, it it catalyzes. First it stops in the
Well,
middle. It doesn't
and with
move.
and with Ahab, and I think this is it's very Nietzschean, right? Like Ahab is such a representation of what it means when the ego tries to separate itself into an individual thing or into this will to power,
Yeah,
into this
yeah,
um I will conquer, I will take this instead of relinquishing and just submitting back into this oneness and back into the unity. It's
yeah,
saying I will rise above. I will conquer. I will become the Uberman. I will rise above. And, it reminds me because and I shared this with you. I can't remember if it was kind of during when we were reading it or maybe we just finished, but I had one of the most intense dreams I've ever had in my life during this process. And in the dream, it started with me in this room with this person, and we were talking about something, and it began to move faster and faster and faster, and then I ended up dying and my life was over, but then my life restarted, and then it moved faster again, and so I kept going through all these lives. I went through hundreds of lives, just faster and faster and faster, to where it became this circle. And then I began to look at God as this eternal recurrence, as like Nietzsche would talk about. It felt like this thing that was going over and over. And I could not even escape it because death was not an exit. I was just on it, right? And it
yeah,
became so overwhelming
mm,
that there it was I don't even know if existential fear is the right way of putting it, because it wasn't it felt like this, like the fear that God I don't even know how to describe it, but it felt so beyond what I was capable of holding. It felt like an energy beyond what I was capable of making sense of, compartmentalizing, defining, any of that. I had to go outside. This was in the middle of the night. I took my shoes off and just put my feet in the ground, just essentially just hug the ground, right? Just like,
yeah,
I know I'm here. That's all I know. And like, and
yeah,
I went back to sleep and I laid back down. The fear that I had was not like a fear of losing somebody or a fear of what could happen, or if something bad happens to a family member, or the fear of dying. It was the fear of not being able to escape death or beyond death. And I don't know how else to describe that, but it was a fear that I'd never felt before, and a weight that I'd never felt before. And as I laid there, the only thing I could think to do, and I thought about Nietzsche, I thought about Ahab, I thought about this confrontation. Because I remember I'd been thinking a lot about the self. I'd been thinking a lot about Jung and Hillman and this idea of trying to define the self. I was like, that time in my life, I was like trying to wrestle. Like I was like, I want to understand the self, which is like, I want to understand God. Like I'm gonna wrestle this down. And what I felt like happened was that the self, the unconscious, that God basically was like, if you want to wrestle, I'll wrestle. And I was just like, the ego, my persona was like, I know I don't want that. Like I can't
yeah,
do that. Like so, the only thing I could think to do was literally just bow at the feet. I just had to submit to that process and say, I my ego is incapable. I can't hold this, and I'm not going to try. And when I fell back asleep, I had this other dream where I was in a room full of people, and I won't go into all the details, but essentially what happened was I was in a group full of people standing in a circle, and this feeling of being connected through love, that we were all one, we were all connected in love, and we were singing, and there was this unity of sound that was just like going through all of us, of this love. And it was just one of the most beautiful dreams I've ever had. So it was like the
yeah,
same circle, but in just so different. And so when I woke up, I just and I remember I called and talked to you about it, but I think that for me was such a embodied experience of kind of what I was looking at, what I was reading in these books, like
yeah,
these stories of what happens when the ego tries to position itself outside of relationality with.
yeah. Because I mean, like, and I even remember, I think we were hanging out in the back and like there was a fire going about a week after that dream. So I can't even imagine what it was like the next day. But there was still this like hollowness. And you're like, "Trey, are you okay?" And you're like, "I think, but maybe not." Like, and there was a real weight to it, but and that was months and months ago. I think it happened this year. But even that, like, that's the Queequeg route. That's letting yourself, instead of that wound being crystallized and stopped in time, and you going in by yourself in the cabin of the Pequod and not even coming out and talking to anyone until like you on at sea for weeks and weeks, right? Like, you had your network, you had your friends, your family. And I, like, knowing you, like I know you, I've seen the growth. I've seen you become, because I guess maybe the dream had something to do with it. You become the next iteration of who you are. And so maybe Pip, if he had the chance to like sink his toes into the dirt, maybe he wouldn't have gone crazy. Maybe Ahab trusts his crew a little bit more. He doesn't go crazy. But I think you're right. Like, you can go into the mystical depths of seeking God. Um, but no man is an island. And I think we're made to be relational in the sense where we have to come up for air, and depending on who's right there, right when we come up for air, that makes all the difference in whether we grow and we, embody a trauma or lived experience that's fearful, or a very powerful dream, or a disease, or a unfortunate circumstance in a relationship or at work, whatever. That's the difference between pulling that in and letting that grow you and saying, okay, life now means this, and then continuing to iteratively explore, versus becoming wounded by having this powerful encounter where the whale bites your leg off, and then that, you know, you get septic, and that infection runs through your body, where then now you're like, okay, I'm going to poke a hole in the sun just to see if I can, which is Ahab, which is so much more than Ahab, because that is a cautionary tale for anyone whose ego is only slightly inflated. Because Ahab didn't start that way, but like, it's like a death by a thousand cuts. I imagine that's how Ahab became Ahab, is just this mindset of, I'm going to reduce the importance of my crew and the whale and the sea, and Ahab is going to grow and grow and grow. And then by the end, like right before the final encounter with Moby Dick, he has this pause and this moment of lucidity where Starbuck sees maybe a chance. Like, I think Ahab's looking at the beauty of the ocean. He's looking at the sky and he starts crying. He just breaks down. And Starbucks like, hey, we're we're actually not too far gone. We can go home right now. They had sighted Moby Dick. They were starting the chase. They were committing to that final act. And Ahab was telling him about his family, that Ahab has a family, he has a wife and kids. Like, who knew? Right? Like, he starts to break down and actually become himself, because the person we've been dealing with this entire book is just that embodied ego. It's this demon that he's letting run through him, right? And then he asks that question, is Ahab Ahab? And after he asks that question, he just reverts and is like, hoist the mainstay, swab he issues the commands, and then they commit to it. But like, he has this final lucid moment where he realizes that he's not even him anymore, and his ego has gone even beyond himself as a whole self, and he's just getting sucked into this action that he's not even for. Like, he wants to see his family, he wants to live, and he knows this is going to kill him. He knows this is a fruitless, pointless endeavor, but the ego has to try,
Yeah.
because you know
And I think it's important to recognize and to acknowledge the fact that a lot of these things, when we talk about ego inflation, we talk about these forces of the archetypes and the things that inhibit us from finding that wholeness, but also that inhibit us from being able to move into greater levels of psychic freedom and awareness. And I think that a lot of times those issues that people face, I say this a lot, the shadow is the shadow because you don't see it. Like, it's not something, it's like you don't oftentimes know what it is until you're encountered by these certain things that elicits those feelings and that brings up those feelings. And I think a lot of times, and we've talked about this a lot, where that initial step into just acknowledging that not every thought is your thought. Not everything that you're holding on to propositionally or in belief, like belief wise, deserves equal weight. and
Mhm.
being able to step back and use books like this. And I think this is something that to bring this home, it's like the beautiful parts about literature like this that represents a journey into this is that it offers this mirror. It offers this thing that when you read this and you begin to identify and project yourself onto a certain character, that highlights what is it inside that you're carrying? What ideas, what energy, what emotions, what is it that is being held onto? And that becomes a portal in which then you can begin to, am I Ahab? Like, am I holding on to this thing that I won't let go of? Or am I like jumped into something and I'm so far gone that now I don't know where's my grounding? Where's my footing? Like, where's the dirt? Um,
Yeah,
if we can just start from that place of allowing ourselves to live the symbolic life is how I like to think of it. You can then begin to realize that there's information that can inform how you are alive on this on this world beyond the linear like causal plane that we see or the algorithmic plane that like the things that we're just taking in, right? Like that's just driving our thoughts and we get trapped in that trance, that doom scrolling trance of
yeah,
just repeating what's coming in. But when we step
yeah,
back, we can see the web, we can see the moving parts, we can see these other things, other people can help. So it offers us a whole new world in which we can now explore.
yeah. No, I well, and so that, like, segues into my not just my favorite chapter in this book, but, like, when I read the chapter of the blacksmith, one of my favorite chapters in, like, all of literature. I think everything about this chapter is beautiful, and it fits exactly what you're talking about. It happens really late in the book after you've already established all the characters that we talk about: Queequeg, Starbuck, Stubb, Teshtigo, Flask, Dagu, Ahab, Pip. All of them have made their appearance. And there is this 3-chapter little aside talking about how the blacksmith, who didn't even have a name until this chapter, got aboard the Pequod. And he was this craftsman of excellence. He was this blacksmith on the land. He had this family, his beautiful wife and children, and was an artisan of famed excellence. But he developed an addiction to alcohol. He let the doom scrolling, I guess, of that time overtake him. He let that he pulled back from his relationships, and he let the medicine of alcohol treat his pain, which was an existential pain because he had felt the call to the sea and he had never gone. And it's a 3-page chapter where it introduces him, tells about how he had a great life, and then one by one his wife and his kids all died because he stopped working, they got sick, they were out of money. It's all his fault, right? He's a reprehensible character. Ishmael understood that there was a drizzly, damp November in his soul, so he knew it was time to go whaling. Like the chapter Loomings, the first chapter of this book, and the blacksmith, there's this real, like, there's this mirroring of each other. Like the blacksmith is someone who should have gone whaling a long time ago and removed himself from the land. Like even in here, like one of the lines in the chapter, the blacksmith, death, why can't thou not sometimes be timely? Had death taken the old blacksmith before his day, the children would have had this thing to look up to. This father that had gone too early, but they're going to work hard and try to continue to provide for their family and grow the community around them. But death didn't come for him; alcoholism came for him, and so he watched his wife and kids die. So he's this reprehensible, tragic character that's at the end of everything, but doesn't want to die, doesn't want to kill himself. And so this last part of the chapter for the blacksmith just hit me so hard because it's this invitation for everybody. No matter how far gone you think you are, no matter how shackled you are with different maladies and diseases and hardships, that the sea is always there. The unconscious is always there. It's literally just walk out and get on a ship. And this last paragraph, death seemed the only desirable sequel for a career like this, but death is only a launching into the region of that strange untried. It is but the first salutation to the possibilities of the immense remote, the wild, the watery, the unshored. Therefore, to death, long eyes, longing eyes of such men who still have left in them some interior compunctions against suicide, does that all contributed an all receptive ocean alluringly spread forth its whole plain of unimaginable taking terrors and wonderful new life adventures. And from the hearts of the infinite Pacifics, the thousand mermaids sing to him, come hither, broken-hearted. Here is another life without the guilt of intermediate death. Here are wonders supernatural without dying for them. Come hither, bury thyself in a life which, to your now equally abhorred and abhorring landed world, is more oblivious than death. Come hither, put up thy gravestone within the churchyard, and come hither till we marry thee. Hearkening to these voices east and west by early sunrise, and by fall of eve, the blacksmith's soul responded, I come. And so Perth went a whaling. And
Mm,
he just drops that chapter there. And ultimately, like the Pequod and everybody on it meets a tragic end. And Perth doesn't get that individuation. He doesn't get that healing from the grief and the trauma that was ultimately self-inflicted. But I don't even think that's the point. I think it's that call and that attempt, that roll of the dice, that I'm going to go try to find God. I'm going to go try to create a straight line between my will and my actions and my words and my intentions. Just that straight line from who God is down through what I say. And there's no masks, there's no personas, and we can let ourselves be more than our egos, and we can go through that process fully of individuation. But even the attempt is noble. Even the attempt is beautiful.
yeah.
The fact that Perth was just this miserable man who was at the end of his life and lost his family because he was addicted to alcohol. You know, everything after that fact was bonus. And so he tried. And who knows if he was successful or not? He definitely died. But maybe when death came, it was something that he met with a smile because he found something in the sea that he had been searching for with his doom scrolling, his alcoholism, his entire life. He finally found the thing he'd been looking for. And then he died. And maybe that's the beautiful part of the story, right?
Yeah, and I think that's to me, that's a important thing to remember and something that I think about a lot when I look at the texture of different lives that I see. I think it's really easy to fall into this idea that the journey of life is to reach a certain destination that looks like the garden. Right? It's like trying to get back into this. Okay, here's the test. It's a big test, and it's all about like passing that test.
We'll
But the
find
reality
Eden.
of it is, it's all so unique to each individual. Everybody's story is, and everybody's journey is so unique. And the thing that is the same is that invitation into experience that uniqueness and to
Yeah.
experience that type of individuation, not just as a homogenous process that's going to look the same for everybody, but in the texture and the uniqueness of how everybody on the Pequod, everybody on the ship is going to have a different approach to that. It's going to play out differently. It's going to look differently. And even in yourself, like it's not going to look like someone else's journey. It's not going to have the same type of flavor that this other journey has. And keeping
Yeah.
that in mind, especially when we start talking about God in today's culture, because I think one of the biggest downfalls that we're having is the lack of space, the lack of time, the lack of silence that we can give each other to go out into the woods, to go out into nature, to go a whaling, to go into these spaces in order to really tune in to the unconscious and not just the generic idea of the unconscious, your specific, like what
No, I mean that's
you.
that's a really good point. Like I remember I was listening to the last few chapters of Moby Dick. I went to church on a Sunday, but then that afternoon I know I wanted to finish the book because it was building and building and building, and I wanted to know how it ended. I didn't really know what the ending was. So I remember I took my sons and their best friend to the beach, and I just sat on the beach with the book in my ears for like 3 hours. And right near the very end, where you know Ahab is asserting his dominant ego onto God, and he's attempting to smite the sun, and the sky and the seas and the whale. I remember my sons and their best friend were at the beach, and they were punching the waves as they came in, and the wave would come in and they'd punch it, and it'd come in and they'd punch it, and so I was visually seeing what was being auditorily depicted, and I was at the ocean. It was this beautiful moment, and I remember just subconsciously completely outside of my ego. I attached the futility of their fight against the waves, the futility of Ahab's fight against the white whale, to something, some large thing. I think some deadline at work or something like something that was stressful to me, and I just subconsciously attached all of that to the futility of fighting the ocean as it came in. That wave's always going to come in. You're never going to be able to win, you know. But they kept going up. They kept going up, and I was like, "That's what's such a silly thing for those boys to do." And immediately, I was like, "Wow, what a silly thing for me to be stressed about something that's just inevitable and completely outside of my control. It's going to be what it is." And anxiety just dissipated. Stress about that thing dissipated. And I don't even remember what it was, but I know it ended up turning out perfectly fine. There's no reason to be stressed about it. And all the stress that it would have brought into that day, it was on a Sunday, maybe that thing was happening on a Wednesday, all the build up to that, that would have leached poison into my house, my boys and my wife and my friends and Joe's stress, my team, the people that work for me, like, what's up with Joe? Like, and so instead of that story of me just, spreading my poison throughout my ship, my Pequod, right? And I was Ahab and I was poisoning the masses. I put that stress into an imaginal landscape and it just floated away in the current and it became a non-thing. And then everybody's lives, they were better because of it. And none of it was real. It was all a made up pretend story that Melville made. And I think that's probably the point of reading a book like this and letting yourself enter into a meditative relationship with things that are timeless and these archetypes that'll be around forever. In 1,000 years, somebody's going to write another book about a space whaleman, and maybe hopefully they can let themselves go through that process, because as fake as it is, as a not true story as it is, it changed me and helped me go a whaling. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, it really challenges the idea of what is realness? What does that
Right.
mean? When I do parts work with people and they encounter these parts of themselves that seem to spontaneously arise out of nowhere, and they have these thoughts and these images and these flashbacks, and then they begin to dialogue with these parts, and it just flows so naturally. You can spend a lot of time, I know, as an outside observer or somebody hearing about this type of work or this type of transaction as interaction. It's like, well, that's silly, made up voice. But at the end of the day, when a person has an experience that profoundly shifts something and they leave with a new view on reality, what are we talking about? Real.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you mean it's real? It's what you're seeing. And yeah, you could be like, well, that's not an actual. It's like, maybe we don't have words for what's actually going on. Maybe we don't have language for what's actually like, what is the realness of what's going on? Like, do we even know? Donald Hoffman talks a lot about the nature of consciousness and the work that he does, and he compares it to this to like a headset or like a TV. It's like we have this headset when you're playing Grand Theft Auto or some video game, you're driving the car, but it's like, are you really driving that car? Like, no, it's just ones and zero. Like it's pixels. It's stuff that if you receive that raw data, you wouldn't even know what to do with it. It's combinatorially explosive. It's too much information that it would be tedious to work with that information that way. But when you see it in the image of a car and you can have the controller and you move it and you interact this way, okay, well now it becomes manageable. And it's like a lot of times life can be looked at that way. It's like we're seeing things, and science already tells us like the perceptions of what we're seeing is not what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Even if you look at like a watch, I can't see, I'm never looking at the whole thing. I'm always looking at part. I have to fill in the gaps on what's on the other side. I'm
Yeah.
constantly doing this with the an imaginal framework in my head of just knowing, what's being constructed there. So I think I say all that to say, like, in this whole conversation that we're having, it's just an invitation to loosen up with yourself about what's real. Loosen up with, like, maybe like give yourself, I always have to say, like, I want to give myself that level of acting as if. just playing with something and seeing what the result is and seeing what gets birthed out of it. Because if we allow ourselves that space, then I think we actually can allow some growth. And I have seen the change in you from going from that literal to adapting to the imaginal symbolic, like seeing these new lives, and it's been amazing. And so hopefully today, hopefully the listeners, I mean, hopefully you guys will get a lot out of this. We'll have to do another one with another book
Yeah, for
sometime
sure.
soon. But I feel like this was really gold and like really rich with a lot of stuff. So Joe, I mean, I appreciate you coming on, man, and I really appreciate honestly just getting to do life with you. And I really hope that the listeners out there has somebody in their life that they can sit down and read Moby Dick with.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
on
it
yeah.
helps. Queequeg lived because Ishmael was at his bedside. Ishmael grew because Queequeg was right there. And yeah, this was a great book to read. Read Moby Dick, everyone. But if you don't, I feel like we're hyping up Moby Dick way too much. It is old. It is not an easy book to get through. Did you find it easy to get through?
No, it's not definitely not if you're narrative driven, if you're reading it to look for a entertaining story, I
Yes.
think you have to have the framework, right? Like the whole thing we're talking about. It's like going into it with this meditative mindset. And if it calls to you, it's like psychedelics, man. If it calls to you, do it. And I think it's the best way of approaching it.
I told someone was like, so you really love this book, and I'm like, yeah, but like if you don't have a grin on your face by reading the first chapter, put it down until you do. Like until the
Uh,
first chapter resonates with you and you feel the call that Ishmael felt and that Perth felt, later in the book, until you feel what's being said and understand that that's the call into the unconscious, maybe put it down because you'll be frustrated with it and then mad at me because I recommended it.
In the meantime, if you guys want to check out my Imaginal workbook, it's a much easier, much shorter book to read. You can
If Melville's not really your speed, you could read this thing I wrote
go
instead.
to, go to my Substack. It is crazy to think like how long he took writing that book and how it was just
Yeah.
like that was
Well,
his thing.
it was supposed to be he had written like pretty standard style adventure books. And he goes on this like weekend retreat with Nathaniel Hawthorne. I think like the year before he's supposed to publish Moby Dick. And Hawthorne, famously the Scarlet Letter author, another prominent 19th century author. And then he was overwhelmed with Hawthorne's just like depth and rich, like, you know, I don't know, metaphorical life. I don't even know what you call it. Melville like made massive changes to the text of Moby Dick and made it what he originally like wanted it to be. It was too scared to put on paper, and it failed like commercially. It like did not do well at all as a book. So I almost wonder if Melville holds like a grudge, like that freaking Hawthorne guy. I wish I'd never but it wouldn't have been. It would have just been maybe one of the other books that like I had never read any other Melville, and maybe that's an indictment to me. But I think maybe that's like most people. Like you read Moby Dick, that's the book that he wrote, and he got no fame, no acclaim. He did not get more subscribers. He did not make a lot of money off. He was it was a flop, and he died relatively penniless, really jaded. And it wasn't until decades afterwards that Jung picks it up, and then academic critics pick it up, and it just became like the book,
Yeah.
the most famous American novel ever. So it is fascinating to see that like the reason that this book was born in the state that it was born in was because of a weekend camping trip with someone that Melville admired, and Hawthorne just told Melville, like, go for it, man. Like, this isn't what you're trying to say. Say what you're trying to say. And it's just like that lends credence to that idea that Melville like knew he unearthed something. He found a treasure in them there hills, and he didn't know how to translate this treasure. So he's like, better just make it normal. And Hawthorne's like, that's not the story. Write the story. Because Hawthorne
Yeah.
was similarly like a true artist that delved in and pulled something out. So
But I mean that's and
if your YouTube channel fails miserably and you die penniless, just remember Melville.
just live for somebody. Yeah, that's a good point to make. It's like at the end of the day, if you're doing what is true to the journey you're on, then there you go. That's all. All right, Joe. Thanks for coming
All right,
on,
man.
brother. All right.
That was fun. Have a good one.
Hold Hey guys, before you go, if I could ask you one quick favor. If you enjoyed this video and you got something from it, I would sincerely appreciate it if you would like and maybe subscribe to the channel. Every bit of engagement helps. And in the meantime, if you're curious to check out more content like this, maybe check out this video or that video. Yeah, that's a good one. And don't forget to subscribe.